It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on a podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, lads and lasses of all ages, welcome to the show. It is a short one because Lam couldn't make it this week, but I still wanted you to have something for your podcast feed. And maybe it's a little bit of a news item, so I am stepping on Lam's toes, but it does involve legalese and it does involve history, so 2 out of 3, that ain't bad, as Meatloaf would say. What we're talking about is we're talking about ownership, digital ownership of video games. So, the news bit is that a couple of months ago, if it's even been a couple of months, Sony said that they were going to stop producing physical discs. And this led some people to say that this was a bad thing. For the record, Mac is one of them. He thinks it's a bad thing. That did lead some people to grapple for the first time with the notion that video games could be taken away from them if they didn't have a disc. And that is something that, while sad, was always a problem, even with a disc in this modern era of video games. Important distinction. Because the way that it is shaken out is that, especially since, say, about 2010 or so, video games have more and more relied on connection to a central server in order to operate. And since about 2010 or so, maybe a little bit sooner, video games have been presented to you as a license, something that you don't own. You just have a revocable, non-transferable license to play this game for as long as the company feels so inclined to keep letting you, and they can revoke it for any reason or no reason whatsoever. Something that an email that recently went out reiterated to Sony customers. Now, I've seen some takes on this that lean to one side of saying, oh no, all is lost, and then to the other side of saying, well, it's always been this way. And it's to both of these groups that I want to kind of address some comments, but especially to the people who said, it's always been this way. Because historically, that's just not true. Selling a video game as a limited license is relatively new. It really got started in the mid to late 2000s, and became standard practice in the 2010s. So it's not that old of a practice. Before that time, video games were sold as software products. And when video games first came on the scene, they were hardware, entirely hardware. But once we figured out that we could make video games as software, then we started distributing them as software. And software copyrights functions almost identically to a book. And this was definitely the right decision at the time, and I think is still very instructive as to how software, when you buy it, does not give you the right to copy that and distribute it. The copyright remains with the author. Great example. You got a book, physical book, sitting on your shelf. Do you think, or have you ever thought for a moment, that you were within your rights to make additional copies of that and sell or distribute them? Nobody thought that. And nobody argued for that. This is how software and video games were treated up until, like I said, relatively recently. They were sold as software products, and the terms and service, to the extent that they even addressed this at all, told you that you were not given the right to distribute or modify. And that was the exact same way with books. This is why they went that route. And it was perfectly functional and perfectly workable, even for the early days of online games. Now, references to certain lobbyists aside about how Minecraft servers are illegal, we know that it can be done, even online experiences, without a required connection to a publisher, which is perfectly legal and perfectly workable. However, the approach to video games as selling a license is a new phenomenon. And what I get concerned about is folks saying that it's always been this way as a way to essentially stop you from thinking about how video games should be, or whether or not this is the way you want it to be. Maybe I'm being a little overdramatic, but it does seem to me that even if it were true, which it isn't, but even if it were true that it had always been this way, saying that really just serves to shut down the conversation and prevent us from asking how it could be or should be in the future. And that's really what I want to leave you with. Again, it's not true. But even if it were, what's stopping us from advocating for a better future for gaming? A future where you pay money to get an experience, and you can continue experiencing that, pulling that book off of the shelf as often as you would like, for as long as you would like. Because that's the way it used to be. That's the way, up until very recently, it had always been. And that's the way it could be in the future. As Lom tends to say, video games are art. As I like to say, art should be experienced. And as we both like to say, art should be preserved. Thanks so much for coming out. And hopefully, this leads you down a little bit of a rabbit trail to go looking into the things that we've talked about here on the show, as well as the things that the people over at Stop Killing Games have been doing to try and advocate for protections for you as a consumer, as well as protections for the art itself. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Monday, twitch.tv/2nerds in a pod, 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Central for our live recording, or of course, Wednesdays when we usually get the podcast up. Keep it nerdy. Bye.